Hey there, Home Church, and happy Sabbath Sunday. My name's Kenny, and I'm the lead pastor here at Home Church, and today is a little different. Normally, we gather together on Sundays to worship and to teach God's Word, but today we're celebrating 4th of July weekend, and we're taking a Sabbath Sunday where we're not gathering in person, we're gathering here online. As a church, we've been walking through a series called The Heart of a Shepherd, where we've been taking Psalm 23 verse by verse and understanding the heart of our shepherd, the heart of God, the heart of Jesus, our good shepherd. And it's been incredible to walk verse by verse through this series to understand the character of the God that we follow, the character of the Savior who has saved us and has reconciled us and that we follow as our shepherd. And it's also been beautiful to learn for us that are shepherds in our own lives how to use and take God's character and to utilize it in the ways that we lead. Today's going to be a very special day. When I first planted Home Church, one of the first things that we looked at was creating a visual identity for ourselves, Home Church. And I reached out to a really good friend of mine who I've worked with before named Kirk Brown. Kirk Brown is the owner of KB Creative and does incredible graphic design work, websites, the whole gamut. And so I sat down with Kirk and I shared the vision of Home Church and I shared the heart of this house. And Kirk worked with me and he created an incredible brand for our church. And ever since, Kirk's been walking with us as our graphic designer. And every series, everything that we do, that we put out there visually, Kirk helps create. He's been a really good friend to this house, and he's been a really good friend and a brother to me. Over the past couple of years, Kirk and his wife, Sarah, have walked through one of the most difficult things that anyone could walk through. And so today, rather than hearing me preach and even hearing our worship team lead, we're going to take an opportunity to hear a real life story from someone who we love and care for about how the Good Shepherd has led him and his family through some of the most difficult days and yet still brings hope. The end of Psalm 23 says, "Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Home Church, listen to this story and know that there is hope to walk with Jesus and to dwell in his house forever.
My name is Kirk Brown, and this is a story of how the Good Shepherd has worked in my life. Sarah and I met in, I think that was 2011. I was working at a Japanese restaurant that's local here to the area that's delicious. I was a cashier. She came up to the front, and I took her order. Everything was great. I think I was working the window, too. So, I saw her, and I was like, I'm going to be a cashier for a moment and ring her up, and I thought she was absolutely beautiful. Took her order. I saw someone that she was sitting with at the table, and I was like, okay, I know that person, so I found her on Facebook, and then, the normal Facebook stalking, saw her tagged in a photo, added her on Facebook, and the first thing that she said to me was, hey, now that we're friends, does that mean I get free Japanese food? And so we had a quick bond over Japanese food then. A couple days later, she reached back out and was like, hey, I don't mean to freak you out, but I've been to your house before. You have blue carpet, right? And I'm like, what is going on? And then it turns out that my parents and her parents were best friends when we were little. They were in each other's community group, in each other's church. And so my mom would babysit her and her brothers all the time at our house, when we were 4 or 3. It's just a long gap to where we've grown up with each other, but that's how we kind of got connected. We started dating in 2012, so it's funny how there was a whole year in between our first date and our second date, but she was doing her senior year at college, so I was being patient and praying to the Lord a lot during that time. We got engaged in 2015 and got married in 2015. And so, when we got married, it was a beautiful wedding. I knew that she was the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. Like, that's my girl. Like, she is my rock. She's my best friend, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Sarah and I always wanted to have kids. We didn't know how many, but we knew we always wanted to have kids. We had a good piece of advice early on that we want our child to come along for the ride. Like, it's not like we're going to stop our marriage and stop our family life to raise this child. We wanted that child to come along for the ride. And so we wanted there to be a ride for her to come, or him to come along too. And so we decided that when we felt the time was ready, to where it's like, you know what, I think we're solid enough to where, like, let's try this. And so we didn't know if that would be a year or 2 or 3 or 4. We would just feel it out. And we got pregnant in 2020. It was February, really January of 2020. We didn't find out until February of 2020. And then the pandemic hit. So we always knew we wanted kids. And we kind of just felt it out and just waited until we felt like we were ready as parents and as husband and wife. So Sarah first told me she was pregnant in February of 2020 by putting a little Clemson onesie that says Daddy's Little Tiger fan. I think that's what it said, but I'm a Clemson fan. And so coming into that, I was like, what is this? And we were trying at that point. And so I knew that when she was going to take a test and stuff was supposed to be the next day. We were trying to wait as long as possible, but she did it without me knowing, and that's how she surprised me with that. And we were just over the moon because I've always wanted to be a dad. That's been like my goal after a husband, was to be a dad to a little one. And the fact that it was going to be a little piece of me and a little piece of her together, like, that was just the best part of it. And so we were super excited. The joy I had when I first held Eliza was like nothing I could have ever experienced any other way. I didn't really know what to expect. Anytime someone had a child, I would ask the father, what's it like to be a dad? Like, what's that love like? Because you've heard stories of like, oh, you haven't felt that until you become a dad. You don't know until you felt it. So I always was like asking people what it was like to be a dad. And when Eliza came, it was a normal pregnancy. Everything went great. She labored for 48 hours. She was a trooper. You ready, sweetie? Got the car seat. On our way. We'll see what happens.
We'll see.
See you soon, Eliza. Say bye, Oliver. Let's go. She's a hero. And then Eliza came, got to meet that beautiful little face. We were trying to do skin to skin at first, and but she wasn't crying when she came out. And so they immediately picked her up and took her to the warming station. And we didn't think anything was wrong at that point. But, we were still concerned because our plan and our goal was to do skin to skin for a good hour. But seeing her on that table, and it looked like a whole bunch of nurses were like doing a bunch of tests and things. After about 45 minutes of her on the table, the nurses came back and handed her over to Sarah. And all they said was, she's perfect. She's a perfect little girl. She's just a chill and calm baby. She just didn't cry. And so they did all the tests and everything was good. And at that point, it was like, okay, we made it. We did it. Let's be parents now. And so they handed her over to Sarah. And I still have the photo. It's like etched in my brain of the exact photo when Sarah held Eliza for the first time as a mom outside of the womb, and the look in her face was just pride and pure happiness. Like, if there was peak happiness in her eyes, that was it. And so I absolutely loved that. For me, as the dad, you don't go through all that pain. It's really just you're just helpless and you're just out of control. And so when my wife was going through all of that, you're really just doing everything you can to help her and help the process and the doctors and nurses. And so it's a lot of going on. But once she got here, I think for me, it was more of shock. It was more of like, wow, oh man, I'm a dad. Oh snap, that's crazy. This is really happening. And it probably wasn't until the day after when I was holding her that I just started weeping. We didn't know anything was wrong at this point, but I was just weeping because it broke my heart that she didn't know how much I loved her. She was just this person laying on me. And it's just, I just kept saying that to Sarah. I was just like, I wish she knew how much I love her. I wish she knew how much I love her. And it was a love like I had never felt before. And it was the best thing. We didn't know anything was wrong with Eliza at first. We had that first little scare at the beginning when she didn't cry. But as the days went by in the hospital, she still didn't cry, but every nurse that checked her would be like, she's perfect. She's just a perfectly chill baby. That's all they said, is she's just a chill baby. And so me and Sarah look at each other like, hey, we made it. We scored, we don't really have a crier of a baby. But it still concerned us because you always want to hear your baby cry. You always want to hear noises come from her. But as the days went by, we could definitely tell her tone was starting to go down. She wasn't as mobile. She wasn't moving as much. Her feeding had kind of ceased, so we had to start supplementing with the bottle. And we kind of knew something was up because even though they kept saying she was just a perfectly chill baby, it seemed like every shift change, the new nurse, it felt like they were getting briefed and they would come in like, well, let me take a look at her. It's almost like they were feeding off information like, hey, can you go check in the baby in this room just to see? Because I tried, but everything looks great. And so every time we saw a new nurse or doctor come in for 45 minutes at a time to test her and check her, it seemed like, everything was fine. But for us, we knew something was off a little bit. We stayed there probably 2 days. And then on the third day, they wanted to keep her overnight one more time. They wanted to test for jaundice, see if that was the reason she's not as mobile or responsive as much. And so we did that. We also thought it was just because she was a sleepy baby, because she was born at 37 weeks because she was induced because Sarah, just as a precaution of high blood pressure. So that was another factor of, she's just a sleepy baby, because young babies are just sleepy all the time. We stayed the whole night that next night, and her bilirubin levels came back normal. And after they tested that morning, they said, all right, prepare to think of when you're going to go get the car seat out of the car. She's good to go. We're going to do one final check, and then we'll let you go home. And a nurse, it was like right in between shift change, so she was about to go home. She actually stayed a little bit after to do the testing, and her temperature, Eliza's temperature was a little cold, so they were like, I can't get her temperature right, so we're gonna send her to the I think they called it a special nursery, but really it was the ICU of that hospital. We were in Novant Matthews. They were going to send her, so you get some hours sleep. They were telling me and Sarah to get an hour of sleep, and at that point we were fine with like, okay, yeah, if you're going to monitor her just to get her temperature or see what's wrong with the thermometer, that's fine. And so, but we couldn't sleep because it was our first time being away from our little girl. About an hour after that, the doctor came in and said that Eliza's tone has just been off, and they need to do more tests, but they don't have the equipment at that hospital, so we need to transfer her up to Presbyterian. It was at that moment where we realized something was serious, but we just thought, we just need answers, so we were like, of course, we can, send her off, but we didn't like that and prefer that. But if it was to help Eliza, of course, we're all for it. And so, when we left, we packed up our things. They transferred her through a almost like a stretcher incubator for babies. We went and saw her before they transferred her, and she was just hooked up to all these tubes and wires, and she seemed untouchable because she was just hooked up to everything, and that broke our heart seeing her like that. But we also had hope. We had plans to see her and hold her again, and this is only temporary because we're just trying to find answers and things like that. So we left the hospital not with her in her car seat, but instead following an ambulance to Presbyterian. When we got to Presbyterian, they were getting her situated, and so we were in the waiting room, and it was during COVID also, to where we weren't allowed to sit anywhere, and Sarah had just given birth like 2 hours or 2 days before that, and so we were just standing there in the middle of a hallway waiting for them to give us the cue to bring our little girl back, or to bring us back to our little girl, and we were just sitting there crying because it's just not supposed to be this way. When we got to see her, it was in the morning time because everything happened in the morning. They did so many tests that day. They did MRIs, EKGs, EEGs, I think that's what it is, spinal taps, antibiotics, everything you can think of, and there was just no answers for why she just wasn't as responsive. Fast forward to midnight that same day, and the doctor came to us. We were about to go home and go to sleep because we were just exhausted, and they had a camera on her. The doctor came to us and told us, I've been on the call with someone from Levine's Children's Hospital who specializes in metabolic disorders, and she seems to think she knows what this is. So we're going to transfer her to Levine's so that you can have the care there and figure out what's going on. She made it sound open-ended, like still going to do more tests, but we could see in her eyes when she was telling us that, be prepared for what you're about to hear. Almost like she already knows, but she wants us to hear it from the other doctor. And so it was at that moment where we followed the ambulance again to Levine's, met with the doctor there, and she sat us down. This was like at 1:30 a.m. And that's when she told us the news that they believe Eliza has a metabolic disorder called non-ketotic hyperglycemia, which is NKH for short. Basically, she was born without parts in her DNA that converts glycine to energy in the head. And when you don't have that part to convert glycine to energy, it just builds up in the brain and causes brain damage. And there's no course of correction. There's no surgery. It's just in the makeup of her genes and DNA. And that's when she said that there's nothing we can do except just keep her alive as long as possible. We got to meet her and see her again after hearing that news, after spending all day not being able to hold her. She was hooked up to every wire you could possibly think of. And that's all I wanted. No news in the world could keep me from my little girl. Like, I just wanted to hold her one more time and all be right with the world. I don't care about the news. I don't care about anything. I just wanted to hold her in that moment. And we did that. And that was the start of a really difficult journey. I remember the next morning when we were at Levine's, my pastor met us there, and he gave us some really wise words when we told him the prognosis. He said, take advantage of every moment possible. And I remember telling him that I want to pray for God's will to be done, as scripture says, and as Jesus did in the garden. But I told him I honestly at this point don't want to pray that because I'm afraid of how it's going to turn out. And I remember him saying, now's not the time to be the perfect Christian. Now's the time to feel what you feel. And yeah, you feel anger, you feel sadness, you feel all these things. And I remember taking that, and every day we had in the hospital, taking advantage of every moment and putting all the anger and sadness aside and trying to embrace and take advantage of every single opportunity we had with her. We tried to take that advice and do everything that I wanted to do with my kid and do it with her. So we read her books, we told her stories, we sang her songs. I've always wanted to do This Little Piggy Went to the Market, This Little Piggy Went Home to my kids, and I did that countless times. I think it annoyed her, but oh well. Our family got to come in under special circumstances and meet her and hold her. They got to pray over her and sing songs and read her books, and I love taking naps, and so I took a nap with her under the watchful eye of Sarah, but got to take a nap with my little girl, and yeah, we took advantage of every single opportunity we could think of. Anything that we wanted to do with our kids, we did. With our kid, we did. And then on October 13th is when she passed away. So we had 9 days with her total, 6 additional days after the hospital. But those 6 days, we didn't feel the grief or sadness yet. We didn't feel, it was almost like we put that to the side because she's still here right now in this moment. No news can take that away, so we're going to be here, we're going to be present and do everything we can. Walking out of the hospital without her was probably the hardest thing me or my wife has ever had to do in our life. Our whole family was with us, walking behind us, but it was almost like we wanted to walk as slowly as possible because, the body and shell of our little girl is being left behind in that hospital. And we would never see it again, except through pictures and videos. And I just remember just a sense of defeat, a sense of helplessness of walking out of there without her. And I can just still imagine and just picture just the slowness of just almost felt like we were levitating through the hallways, down the elevator, through the parking lot one last time. I'd say we really learned a lot about grief and sorrow in the days and months and years following. At first, there was probably not an hour in the day where we weren't crying, almost to the point where it felt like there was no more tears left to be shed. It was just a really dark time, feeling wise. But we took the advice of our pastor and we felt what we felt. We didn't run from it. I'm an Enneagram 7. I'm an optimist, very outgoing. And so I know that with Enneagram 7s and my personality type, the negative aspect of it is gluttony. So not just food, but anything to avoid pain. We just dive into binging Netflix or whatever to get our mind off pain, because Enneagram 7s don't like pain. And I knew that, but I knew that she is someone worth having pain for. Our daughter is someone worth grieving. And so I wanted to lean into that. People thought we were really odd because they wanted to, before we got home, take down all the ultrasounds. They wanted to take the car seat out of the car so we didn't have to. They wanted to take all the Amazon packages that we had ordered in the hospital off the porch to make it easier for us. They wanted to do everything they can, and they meant well, and we get that. And I know for a lot of people that are grieving, people have different things, but I wanted to make a point of just, me and Sarah, we wanted to make a point of just leaning into the hard, knowing that this is going to be hard and we're going to let it be hard. We're not going to run from it because she's worth grieving over. She's worth weeping over, because the amount of grief and love, amount of grief and sorrow that we had is only a testament to the amount that we loved her. The Marvel TV show from Disney Plus, WandaVision, has that saying, what is grief if not love persevering? And that completely encapsulated how we felt, because when we cried and wept, it's because we loved her, and it was like a weird itch that we needed to scratch. Like, I wanted to weep over her, and that's not a bad thing. Spiritually, I was in a place, Sarah and I both were in a place that we've never been in before. We have never really experienced any trials of this sense that really tested our faith. But we wanted to feel what we felt. And a wise person once said that, it was from a book I was reading called Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy. It was really, really good on the topic of lament and grief and sorrow. But in it, in one of the first chapters, he mentioned how when you go to God in prayer, go to him with all that you're feeling, anger, questions, curiosity, concerns, bitterness, go to him with all of that. Because if you're still going to him with that, that means you're still finding him faithful. And so when you stop going to him is when you discredit, thinking he's not someone worth going to. And so we did that every chance we got in prayer. Our prayers looked a lot different after Eliza, but they were more honest. And if anything, I thought they brought us closer to him, because we were just, there were a lot of yelling nights. And he listened. He understands. He knows what it's like to lose a child. In the months following Eliza's passing, we learned a lot about ourselves. We learned a lot about, grief and sorrow. It's almost like being away at war. We did grief counseling for a little bit. We did 9 weeks. It was really helpful, and we didn't know what to expect going into it. It was just a room full of people that have also lost children. And I remember being in that room, not going there to be encouraged, because there's really nothing you can say to liven people up. And that's what we learned early on, is people would try to bring you up, like, oh, well, who knows, this time next year you might have a kid, or ooh, who knows what'll happen, or try to paint a silver lining on it. And that's when we really learned the difference between empathy and sympathy. Empathy is, being in a dark hole just alone, and someone crawling into the hole with you, and just being there with you, and just this stinks, but I'm here. That's what a lot of people did, and we were really grateful for that. Sympathy is just looking down in the hole, saying, "Man, that stinks," from a distance, and then carrying on with your day. And I think we really learned empathy, and we started having empathy with other people in other situations and other stories. But we knew that we didn't want to be encouraged. We wanted people to come down with us. Like, we didn't want to be lifted up. We want people to come down and just be with us. And that's what kind of grief counseling helped us do, is just be in a room and just look in the other people's eyes, like people that were just come back from deployment, other soldiers, to where they can look and just be like, I know what you went through. That's what it's like with other people that have had grief. It's like a special club that, if you haven't gone through it, it's really tough to understand, because everyone's story is different, but everyone's grief is the same. And it's because anything you love, you'll grieve over. And so that was a special time, a special dedicated time to just talk about our little girl, talk about Eliza and all the dreams we had for her. And in the months following, we also learned to give a lot of grace to people. I still say that, September Kirk and Sarah wouldn't know how to interact with October Kirk and Sarah, because you don't know until you've gone through it. And so when people say the wrong thing, or when they mean well, or when they try to, lift you up or something, just to give grace, because they just don't know. We learned about the balance of hope and joy with sorrow and grief. Just that balance of joy and sorrow. I remember it was 2 weeks after, it's just a funny story, but it was 2 weeks after Eliza's passing. When Eliza was in the hospital, I got really good at swaddling. I was like a professional at swaddling. That's what I was known for around the whole hospital, maybe the whole state or country. I don't know. But I was really, really happy with how I swaddled. And I remember it was a couple weeks after her funeral, and we were just reminiscing on Eliza and things of that nature. And I mentioned, or Sarah mentioned, like, remember how good of a swaddler you were? And I was like, yeah, I was pretty good. And I remember there was this moment where we were both sitting on the couch and we both looked at each other, almost like we knew what we were thinking, just cracked a smile. And fast forward 5 minutes, I'm swaddling Sarah in a big blanket on the floor, and just to, be able to swaddle. We laughed so hard in that moment because she was just this big old, in a swaddle. Not a big old person. She's gonna hate that I said that. But yeah, she was just swaddled. Anyway, we were just laughing and having a great time. And there was a moment where we felt guilty right afterward of like, we shouldn't be laughing or we shouldn't be smiling. Like, what's wrong with us? And that's when it hit us that there's a balance of joy and sorrow. And I can't remember where I heard it from, but there was a line that said, "Hope sings sorrow's harmony." And as a music guy, I loved that, because right now sorrow is carrying the melody and hope is there. Hope and joy is still there, but it's carrying the harmony. But right now, all we hear melodically is sorrow. Maybe one day hope and joy will carry the melody, and then sorrow would be the harmony. But until that day comes, both of them are going to always be there together, and crying one minute, laughing another. That's what gives us the ability to, when I look at or think of Eliza, some days I crack a smile just because of how wonderful she was. Some days I crack a tear or flood a tear because of how much I missed her and all that we've lost. And you never know. Every day's a new mystery. We knew that we wanted to try again. We wanted more children, not to replace Eliza. Eliza was always going to be our first. But when we lost her, we got the parents' title with no child. So we knew that we were a mom and dad, but we didn't feel like it. We were parents with empty arms, and nothing could replace that, and nothing could fix that. But we knew that we definitely had love of parents that we wanted to put onto a child. And so that's when we started talking of bringing another child into this world. And so we spent the whole 2021 just kind of either trying or just being with one another and grieving. We didn't want to rush it. The doctor told us that we needed to wait at least 9 months in between Eliza and getting pregnant. So really that was 9 months of just empty arms and just being with one another, being with the Lord, growing in the Lord. And I couldn't have asked for a better partner to do that during that time. Yeah, she's my best friend. She's just, watching her go through that also was really tough, especially on the big days like Mother's Day, Father's Day, 1 year anniversary of her birth, of her passing, all of it. Everywhere we went, we thought she should be here. Yeah, we were excited about the potential of bringing another child for Eliza's little sibling. We were excited for her to be a big sister potentially and start that journey and see where it headed. So we got pregnant in September of 2021 to our second little child. We found out it's a girl, so we're having another little girl. And her name is Zoe Mae Brown. How we picked the name, we knew we loved the middle name May because that was the middle name of her grandmother who passed away a few months before Eliza. And so we knew that we wanted that as a middle name. And Zoe, I remember Sarah and I sitting on the couch and she said, "Kirk, I have an idea for a middle name or for a first name for our little girl, and I need you to not say no." And so when the husband hears that, they're like, "Okay, sure." And she said Zoe. And I'm like, I love it because it's got like a Z borrowed from Eliza. Yeah, she'll always have that with her. And then we looked up the meanings of the name. Of course, normally before they pick a name, people normally find out the meanings first, and then they pick it and decide whichever it was. But we already knew it was going to be Zoe Mae Brown and looked up the name. And May means wished for child. And I was like, oh, that's so appropriate. And that's really special. And Zoe means life. In particular, it's the Greek word that Jesus used in John 10:10 of the life that he calls people to. So in essence, she's named after, kind of on accident, but not really because God knew. She's named after the life that we're calling her to, the life that her big sister possesses. So anytime we see her or say her name, we're speaking about that life that Jesus has graciously given us. The pregnancy was completely normal. It was challenging, just the balance of the joy and sorrow. Having baby showers again, knowing the last time we had a baby shower, we weren't able to bring our little girl home, all the stuff that we opened, yeah. But for Zoe, there was still hope, still a time for celebration, and we wanted to make a statement of we're not going to be going into this pregnancy in fear. We're going to give her the same amount of love that we gave Eliza, because I don't want to hold back any love from fear. And that's usually what fear does, is it causes us to not love as much as we should. And so we wanted to lean in fully and celebrate, go all in, because it's going to be heartbreaking no matter what, because in the back of our mind, there's always that what if. But I wanted to be able to say that I love this child with as much effort as we did with Eliza. And by God's grace, she was born. Zoe Mae was born in May, on May 3rd, 2022. So as I'm saying this, she's going to be 8 weeks old tomorrow. She is an absolute gift and an absolute joy. Yeah, it's been a really good time watching her grow, and just, doing the dad thing, the 3 a.m. feedings, um, the poopy diapers. It really and truly is all a gift. And I might not have seen it that way if everything didn't happen with Eliza. So Eliza not only taught me what it meant to be a dad and a type of love I had never felt before, she also taught me appreciation and savoring every moment. And just like that balance of just hope and joy and sorrow and grief. As much joy as we're having with Zoe, it just reminds us even more of what we lost with Eliza. Like we knew we lost a lot and that we missed out on a lot. But as we're watching Zoe grow and the little milestones that she's doing, it's really opening up our eyes to how much we lost and missing out on. Like, oh, I wish we watched Eliza do this, and wish we watched her, do her first, head tilt and all that fun stuff. And yeah, it still comes with it, and we're never going to get out of the grief. But that joy is still there. There's still grief, but there's joy, but there's grief, but there's joy. It's just the constant battle. And I think once we acknowledged it, that, it's always going to be here. We're not going to move on. We're going to move forward. We're walking with a limp, but we're walking nonetheless. I think that's just how the mindset that we'll have for the rest of our life, that we're just going to be walking with a limp, but we'll be walking with a limp with our little girl, Zoe, and carrying the memory of Eliza, her big sister, and seeing how that goes. I remember when she was born, we were worried what the experience was going to be like, because she was being born in the same hospital, and the last time we were in that parking lot was when we were following an ambulance out. And so when we were pulling in, because she was going to be induced again, when we were pulling in, there was a shot of grief. I wouldn't say it was traumatic, because the first part following the ambulance was traumatic, but it was more of a triggering post-traumatic stress disorder type of situation where we were just not knowing what to do. But we prayed. We asked God and pleaded for Him to just give us assurance that He was in this. Give us peace and rest, and knowing that He was in control and that He was going to get glory through it regardless. We also prayed and pleaded that it would be a separate experience. Just going into it, not feeling like, oh, I remember when Eliza was this. I remember when we took her to this table and stuff like that. And he graciously answered that prayer. It was the small things, like when we checked into our room in the I almost said in the hotel, but in the hospital, it was mirrored from how Eliza's was. So it wasn't. So if the bed with Eliza was on the left side, Zoe's was on the right side, and so it felt like a complete flip. Did not feel like this, like we were just sitting here in these chairs. It felt like a new experience, and by God's grace, it was a time where that was solely Zoe. How that was like, this was her time. These were her moments. It wasn't overshadowed by our prior experiences. And luckily, some of the same nurses that helped deliver Eliza and take care of her were also with Zoe. The same one that gave her a bath, gave Eliza a bath, gave Zoe a bath. And there's just those cool moments where it's just really special to see. And being able to put her in a car seat and put her in the car. I remember walking out of that hospital with her in the car seat. I waited so long to be able to do that, and it was a special moment. It was really special. It was It was an answered plea. It was an answered plea. And God has been really kind with us, with Zoe, and having her with us at home. Looking back over the last couple of years, thinking about our good shepherd and how good he is. That word good, he's not just a shepherd, he's a good shepherd. We definitely see evidence of God's grace, even in the darkest tragedy. Like that nurse that was taking care and doing one last checkup for Eliza. It was during a shift change, and she could have easily said, I'm not getting this thermometer right. You know what? You go ahead and go on home. It's probably just a fluke or something. You go ahead and go on home, be a family. Just because it was the end of her shift. She could have easily done that. But instead, we see it as God's kindness, that she allowed her to do her job fully with wisdom. Because the doctors told us a few days later that if we had taken her home, she would have passed away in her sleep that night. And me and Sarah would have found her in her crib or bassinet. And that would have been heartbreaking. We would have felt shame, guilt as parents. We would have not had closure, not been able to say goodbye, not been able to, do all the things that we did. But by God's kindness and his grace, he allowed us to have 6 additional days. 6 additional days to pray over her and sing over her and love on her and do everything that we possibly could. Spend every ounce of time that we could on her. And it's only by his grace. Our family wouldn't have been able to say goodbye. Our family wouldn't have been able to hold her or meet her. And that breaks my heart to think about. But God knew. He knew the road ahead. And he allowed us to spend that time with her. And that whole time with her too. When we were praying, of course we were praying for healing and miraculous healing. But when we were saying that we believe in a God, a good God that can be trusted, we're not saying that we're going to trust that he's going to give us what we prefer, that we're going to trust that he's going to heal her, that we're going to trust that our baby's going to come home with us. What we're saying is we're trusting that he knows what he's doing and that he's going to get glory from this somehow. That sparks more questions than answers, but that's what trust is. Trusting the Lord, that his ways are good, that when he's a shepherd, tending a flock, telling his sheep to come over here, don't question it, just knowing that he probably senses danger. He probably senses something ahead that you don't see. And so we leaned fully on trusting in him. And like I said earlier, of how there were lots of yelling nights of anger and confusion, still are. But we still talk to him nonetheless. If anything, it's grown our relationship with him. Another thing was just the walking through the valley of the shadow of death. I had never known what that looked like before. I had never known how much of a valley and how dark and alone it feels. And so it makes sense for the Lord to want to make it very clear that he's with us. He doesn't promise us no hard times. He doesn't promise that life's going to be easy. He just promises that he's going to be with us through it all. And as a believer, that means that, when we think of the word safety, God calls us to take up our crosses and follow him. He doesn't promise us safety. He promised that he's going to be with us. There's Chronicles of Narnia, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, Mr. Beaver, and the little girl. How Mr. Beaver was saying Aslan is the great lion, and the little girl was saying, "Oh, a lion! I didn't know that he was a lion. I'm quite afraid of lions. Is he safe?" And Mr. Beaver said, "Safe? Who said anything about safe? But he's the king. He's good, I tell you." And looking back of like, yeah, God's not safe, but he's the king and he's good. He's a good shepherd. And it's crazy to people that don't believe when they hear me say that, I still trust in God, that I still love him, that I still follow him. Like, how could you serve a God that allowed this to happen? And honestly, the hope that we have is what keeps us going. The hope that we have is what makes me see that I'm going to see my little girl again, that I'm going to be able to hold her. That's the trust that I have. And what a day that would be. What a day that would be.